Hello everyone, my name is Isabella Muhammad, and today I'll be presenting Me3, Analyzing International Response to #MeToo through film. It's essentially impossible to know that you're living through history while it's happening, but I was living through history when I was a senior in high school and I saw the #MeToo hashtag rise up and gain popularity. Since then, it's still been relevant 3 years later, and I see the impacts of the Me Too movement in film and television, in American culture, in our politics and our policies, and even in my everyday life and discussions. Beyond that, it gained relevance worldwide, and other countries developed hashtags in their native language, but we also see a response in their policies as well as their media, including their film and their television. Which brings me to my research question. How do different nations represent the tenets of Me Too in their films? In order to explore this, first I'll attempt to define the Me Too movement, which, disclaimer, will be difficult as we're still in it, but I'll talk a little bit about how I did that. Secondly, I'll get into my analysis, and we'll look at 3 different films, one from the US, one from Australia, and one from Israel. And then finally, I'll get into my implications and my conclusion. So just a quick background, a little time on Me Too and how it came to be. Our first coined term, Me Too, was Tarana Burke in 2006. She was working as a counselor, and she heard a young woman's story of sexual assault, and she felt bad because she didn't have a way to help her in the moment, and she couldn't even tell her Me Too. And so she started a nonprofit foundation called Just Be Inc. that helped victims of sexual assault and harassment. The movement didn't take to popularity on social media until over a decade later, but in between 2006 and 2017, fourth wave feminism rose up. And while Me Too is not exclusive to fourth wave feminism and it's not overtly extensive of fourth wave feminism, it does build off their tenets, and the two mutually benefit each other. Specifically, one of the tenets of fourth wave feminism as internet, this idea that everyone has access to an audience of some sort and they can, promote change from their computer or their phone, but also this idea of call-out culture, that we can see reprehensible behavior and call it out, which is what Me Too movement attempts to do. So in 2017, we see what most people would assert to be the official start of the movement when Alyssa Milano tweeted, "If you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write Me Too" as a reply to this tweet. So you can see how quickly it took. Within 24 hours, there were over 12 million Facebook posts with the hashtag Me Too, not to mention on this screenshot that was taken in 2020 that there are 40,000 retweets and 50,000 likes. We see that in media as well. So in 2018, we saw the release of Israel's film Working Woman, which we'll be looking at today. Then in 2019, we saw Unbelievable, The Morning Show, Untouchable, Bikram, probably many more. Those are just the ones that I've seen. And then the film Bombshell, which we'll also be looking at today. While that might seem like a gap in response from 2017 to 2019, that's actually pretty immediate given that this tweet was released in October of 2017, so late 2017, and accounting for production time. And then finally, bringing us up to date, not to mention the renewal of The Morning Show and other shows that address Me Too, we also see the release of The Assistant, an Australian film that we'll be looking at that covers the tenets of Me Too. So in assigning tenets to Me Too, there were 3 basic things I wanted to account for. First, we did see the start in the entertainment industry with Alyssa Milano's tweet. That was in response to Rose McGowan and other actresses' allegations against Harvey Weinstein. And then we saw more people start to snowball with allegations against Bill Cosby or Louis C.K. or James Franco. There's almost too many to name. And we saw that extend into politicians. So other people in the public arena are experiencing that scrutiny now. Most prominently, Brett Kavanaugh, when he was up for nomination to the Supreme Court. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford came out with allegations about him. Then we also saw President Donald Trump had allegations, Senator Al Franken, and then most recently, former Vice President and current presidential candidate Joe Biden was accused of sexually assaulting a former aide of his. While that seems like a lot, politicians are elected to represent us. So when people are looking at their politicians and they're seeing that they're accused of sexual assault, well, A, they probably don't feel represented, but B, they might realize that that issue looms larger than they believed. And so even though scrutiny is what we see most in the news, no one's going to talk about, the average person and tell stories of that. We did see a growth in their ability to speak up because Bureau of Justice, the American Bureau of Justice, released their crime report annually at the end of 2018, and it showed that the rate of reported rape and sexual assault cases nearly doubled from 2017 to 2018 following the release of Alyssa Milano's Me Too tweet. This isn't because people were raping at twice the rate. This growth was uncharacteristic of previous trends, and it's likely because people were finally starting to speak up at twice the rate than before, which gets to the biggest tenet of Me Too, which is that above all else, at the core of Me Too, it aims to empower victims of sexual assault to speak up. That is the biggest aim, first to draw attention to it and give people the power to open up that conversation and talk about their experiences and to be able to move past that trauma and work through it. And contrary to popular belief and some of the radicalization, this movement is not exclusively a movement for women. While women do experience sexual assault much more frequently than men, there are popular instances of male allies, female allies, of course, female assailants, male victims, that maybe aren't as common but are still spoken about. So we have Terry Crews, who came out about his experience. He was a male ally. We also see Ronan Farrow, who, as far as I know, hasn't been sexually assaulted, but did push the publicity of Harvey Weinstein's allegations. And he was a journalist for the New York Times who originally wrote that article. Then you also have Kevin Spacey, who is an actor in Hollywood who is accused by other men of sexually assaulting them while working together. And then you also have Asia Argento, who was accused of statutory rape. She's an actress. She was accused of statutory rape of a 17-year-old when she was 37 years old. And it's actually ironic because she came out with allegations against Weinstein, but then was canceled because she had her own allegations that she paid hush money to get rid of. So this movement is not about gender. Just like fourth wave feminism, it's really about equality for everyone. So we see male and female victims, male and female assailants, and male and female allies as well. So with all of that in mind, some of the criteria we'll be looking at in our movies today are how weighty is the role of the movement in the film, kind of how obvious is it that this film is about Me Too? What aspect of the movement is demonstrated most clearly? So there are a lot of different parts of sexual assault experiences that we can look at, but what was the one that each director felt was most important? And then finally, how graphically did the movie represent the assault itself? So you've got a big spectrum from showing a full-on rape scene from start to finish, even to just maybe an off-color conversation. And so that approach is going to be pretty critical in the priorities of the director. First film we'll be looking at is Bombshell, which was released by American director Jay Roach in 2019, and he retold the true story of Fox CEO Roger Ailes, who had allegations against him and was forced to resign. This actually happened in 2016, but Jay Roach revisited it because of its newfound relevance and also the growing audience for content like this. So in terms of the weight, Me Too is actually the main character of the film. The reason I insert this is because typically the main character of the film is someone who we're following throughout the entirety of the film, and we see their relationships to different people in the film throughout the whole thing as it changes, if there's conflicts and things like that. But really who we're following throughout the film is Me Too. There are a lot of different characters in this movie, and we do see all of them, but not really one more than the other, and it's not really about their conflicts with people, it's about their conflict with Me Too. And so we see man versus man conflict between people who accuse Roger Ailes and people who claim Roger Ailes didn't do anything, including Roger Ailes himself. We see man versus self conflict for those times where Megyn Kelly claims she's not a feminist, but is still trying to support the Me Too movement, which is heavily associated with feminism, especially in society, which also contributes to a man versus society conflict. The biggest point to make here is that it's all about conflict, which speaks to the next point, which is that the aspect Jay Roach wanted to focus on most is trauma, and he relies heavily on dramatization, intensity, and conflict throughout the whole film. And another way he does this is by walking the line of politicizing the movement by showing the story of Fox, which is a primarily conservative news network, trying to cover Me Too, which is known for being a more liberal policy or an ideology that is affiliated with left-wing politics more so than right-wing in most cases. And so we see the intensity of the drama. It's also quite fast-paced in the film. It's got a soundtrack, it's got background music to kind of immerse the viewer in its experience. And then in terms of graphicness, Jay Roach actually stepped away from that intensity to show the assault scenes, which I think was really smart. We have a very realistic approach to assault scenes. So the most graphic scene includes Caleb Pospisil, played by Margot Robbie, in a casting meeting with Roger Ailes, played by John Lithgow. And he asks her to stand up, give him a spin, because, quote, it's a visual medium. She does that, she gives him a spin, and then he asks her to pull up her dress. So this scene is really characterized by anxiety. You can see in the way that the camera captures her hands slowly inching up her dress as Roger Ailes continues to say higher. Both of them have very shaky breathing for completely different reasons. You see her fearful face, you see the tension in her body. And Jay Roach he filmed this with different cameras at the same time because he didn't want to have Margot Robbie have to film this more than once, because it does make you feel incredibly violated as a viewer and as an actress or actor to have to see a scene like that. And it's impressive because you don't even have to see, they don't even touch, there's no contact, there's nothing that other people would say is obviously sexual assault. There's no penetration of any kind. They're standing about 6 feet apart in the scene, yet you can see that it's incredibly violating and still clearly assault of some sort. Another important point to make about this film before we move on to the next one is that it does a great job of balancing the accomplishments of Roger Ailes with the atrocities as well. So they keep from demonizing him. They still credit him for his political and media savvy, as well as his ability to create an empire, the Fox News network. But they still acknowledge the trauma that he's asserted on women. So they keep from radicalizing the movement, as some do, by vilifying not only men, but specifically the assailants in these cases, and losing the humanity of the person. So the next one we'll be looking at is The Assistant. This was released by Australian filmmaker Kitty Green in 2020. And while Bombshell shows this highly publicized, highly intense, and scandalous case, Kitty Green shows the rule rather than the exception. And so not all cases of sexual assault get the incredible, resolution that Bombshell got. At the end of Bombshell, the case was, he was found guilty, all the women got whatever money they wanted, and they got their apology, and they were, they felt justified and avenged for all that had happened. But this film, The Assistant, it moves very slowly, and there's really no resolution at all. Which, the first point, the weight of Me Too, is muted by a lackluster cinematography. So this film, I would really describe it to the layman as boring. The way that the camera angles are all very simplistic. So you've got either straight, dead-on for eye level with people, or aerial views of her doing tasks, the assistant, the main character Jane, which is basically the whole film. Not only do we see those basic camera angles with no zooming, no tracking, no panning or anything like that, but we also hear not really any dialogue or anything like that, just like the ringing of telephones, the blowing of an air vent, the sound of keyboards typing, which is not particularly captivating. I mean, that's just everyday stuff. Which brings to the next point, which is that the aspect that they focused on most was the culture of silence. So, like I said, this film, it doesn't really have that resolution that Bombshell had, but it also doesn't really have a beginning, middle, or end. It doesn't have a clear storyline because we're just following her, the assistant Jane, through her everyday tasks of, calling people to arrange travel, or, getting lunch or making copies, and so it's not particularly captivating. But the most eventful part of the film is when she actually tries to speak up about her suspicions of sexual misconduct. So she's not actually even a victim in the film, she's just a bystander. But she goes to another executive in the company and she says, hey, I've seen women kind of come in and out. Sometimes they'll leave behind an earring, and she doesn't really know, but she has suspicions. The first thing that the executive does in response is deflect. So he says, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Immediately trying to distract her from the problem at hand. Then he begins to threaten her. He says, "Do you really want to throw all of what you have away? Like, you got this amazing job. If I file this complaint, you're not going to have any of it anymore." Then finally, he trivializes her thoughts and her concerns. And so she came to him with this complaint, but like I said, it wasn't really solidified because she just has suspicions and she's only caught glimpses of things happening, only parts of the puzzle. And so he reads it back to her, and it's not really a sound concern or a complaint. And so not only does he not file the complaint, but he makes her feel stupid for even trying. Even though he didn't file the complaint, though, he still called her boss, who she was trying to complain about, and told him about it. And so whenever she got back to her desk, her boss verbally abused her and said, "You're incredibly disloyal. I can't believe you would do this after all I've done for you." So there's a sense of manipulation as well. But that is the most eventful part of the film, which is interesting because it's not really eventful at all. And it kind of speaks to a lot of women or a lot of people's experience with sexual assault that, even if you see it, even if you want to speak out, sometimes nothing really happens. And like I said, nothing really happens. In terms of graphics with this film, there's a really unobtrusive inclusion because she's just a bystander. We don't really see her. She's never assaulted. I don't even think we see the executive throughout the entire film. I'm not even sure they had an actor because we would just hear his voice behind a wall or something like that. He was in the office and she was separate from him the whole time. And so the closest thing that we get to an actual scene of the assault is at the end of the film. She goes across the street to a bakery. She leaves work and she sees a silhouette of what might be oral sex. It's implied, it's not totally clear to her, but then she just finishes her muffin, leaves the bakery, and the last scene of the film is her just walking away from the office, assumingly going home and showing that nothing really happened. And so once again, the uneventful nature of the film, almost anemic and pregnant nature of the film, shows that this is what happens. People, they see cases of sexual assault or sexual misconduct and they can't speak up or they don't speak up because of this culture of silence. The final film we'll be looking at today is Working Woman, released by Mikhail Aviad, an Israeli filmmaker, in 2018. And this is the only film that moves beyond the entertainment industry. So we see an Israeli woman named Orna who picks up a job at a real estate agency to help pay for her family expenses while her husband's restaurant business picks up. So in terms of the role of Me Too in this film, it actually has to share the spotlight with the other stressors in this girl's life. So it kind of takes not necessarily a backseat, but they have to split the time and the stress between being sexually assaulted by her boss, to money problems, to her kids being sick, and things like that, which is really important because not only does it show a real person and a real life where her whole life doesn't revolve around being sexually assaulted, but also it shows that this person's a human. Beyond being a victim, she has a marriage, she has a family that are all really important to her and make up who she is more than just being a victim of sexual assault. The aspect of Me Too that Aviad focused on the most was this idea of manipulation. So Orna's boss is named Benny, and after he rapes her, she wants to leave her job, reasonably so, and she feels held captive because whenever she goes to other interviews at other workplaces, she finds that Benny is highly connected. So if he doesn't want her working anywhere else, she will not be able to work anywhere else. She actually has to write the letter of recommendation herself and take it to his house while his wife is there and ask him to sign it in front of his wife. Obviously, Benny is not going to tell his wife why he won't sign it because he can't admit that he raped her. Or even, he might see it as consensual. He can't admit that he had sex with her because he's supposed to be, loyal to his wife. And so Orna has to manipulate Benny in return to feel free. And the final scene is she has her signed letter of recommendation. She's walking away from his house and she feels liberated. Even though Benny didn't get any legal consequences or social consequences for his action, she is at least free of him. So that kind of balances the reality from the film assistant and then also the intensity and the elated energy of Bombshell and the resolution as well. So in terms of graphicness, this is by far the most graphic of the three films. They actually show a full-on rape scene between Benny and Orna from start to finish. We see many scenes before that that are maybe less violating, kind of leading up to it. But it's also the only film that shows a positive sexual relationship as well, with comparable explicitness. We see Orna, the main character, have sexual relations with her husband in a positive light and a healthy light, which kind of shows that representation of a balanced idea of sex, how it can be used positively and negatively. So with all that in mind, how do different nations represent the tenets of #MeToo in their films? So the biggest points to take away is that America was really focused on drawing a wide audience. They used that drama, Jay Roach and Bombshell used that drama and that intensity with every scene except for the sexual assault ones to keep people watching. And so it's not clear whether he was doing this for profit or to actually give voice to the issue. But it is clear that he wanted to draw a wide audience, not only because of the drama, but because of the cast. I mean, you've got an all-star cast here. Not only do you have Nicole Kidman, Charlize Theron, and Margot Robbie in the front, you've got John Lithgow, who's famous, British actor, a comedian actually. And then you've got even like characters like that are supporting roles, like Kate McKinnon, Darcy Carden, Bridget Lundy Payne, and Jennifer Goodwin, who only show up on the screen for like 10 minutes. And so, I mean, that's crazy the amount of money they spent on casting to get people to see this film. It's clear. With the Australian film, The Assistant, they were not going to attract a large audience. I mean, they do have a famous person, Julia Garner, as the main character, but the story itself is not incredibly compelling or captivating in any sense. Like I said, the movie is quite lackluster. It's boring, basically. We're just seeing a woman go about her day and do her job as an assistant, which is also not a particularly interesting job. And so they're not looking to attract a small audience, but they are bringing a very relatable and common story of silence to the screen. And then Israel, the film Working Woman by Mikhail Aviad actually balanced drama and reality from both of the films better than the other two, and empowered the average person. So they moved beyond the entertainment industry into, it's not, you don't have to just be rich, famous woman to get justice for your case. And it's not about just getting legal consequences. You can still move past the trauma, even if you don't have that help from your legal system, or you don't want to have that help from your legal system. And they're empowering the average person who has struggles outside of sexual assault. You see this person who has a family, she's got, you see her mom, you see her kids, you see her husband, which are all different issues of her life that she deals with as well. So in conclusion, Me Too is likely here to stay, as we see in television and film continue to address it. The movement sparked worldwide focus 3 years ago, but some of these movies came out this year, including The Assistant, and then Bombshell came out late last year, and we see the renewal of the shows like The Morning Show, which covers the story of Matt Lauer. But hopefully as representations grow in quantity through numerous TV shows and television films, they will grow in quality too and achieve the balance of positive and negative sexual relationships like we saw in Working Woman. Maybe they will be able to keep from demonizing the assailant like we saw in Bombshell. Hopefully they'll start to include male victims or female assailants or both to kind of speak to the truth of the issue, and then still be able to acknowledge the trauma that's been induced by each of the assailants. Maybe people are drawn to the dramedy and tragedy of it. Maybe people really care about the issue. Regardless, these public conversations will persist because, in the words of Roger Ailes, people don't stop watching when there's a conflict. They stop watching when there isn't one. Thank you, and here are my works cited.